something with you. This could qualify as spiritualism, can also qualify as spirituality. As you know, I've been doing a lot of research for the Independent Spiritualist Association's mediumship book, and I've come to the point where I have to investigate who Emanuel Swedenborg was. And I found something for me, it was profound. And this comes from the book. It's called The Gist of Swedenborg. And what it is, it's a collection of excerpts from his later writings. This person, he published over 80 books, ranging from philosophy to mathematics to metallurgy to astronomy, and the latter part of his life was theology. And this comes from, I believe the name of the book would be called True Christian Religion. And he writes, man is an instrument of life, and God alone is life. God pours his life into his instrument and every part of him, as the sun pours its heat into a tree and every part of it. God also gives man to feel this life in himself as his own. God wills that he should do so, that man may live as of himself, according to the laws of order, which are as many as there are precepts in the word, and may dispose himself to receive the love of God. But still, God perpetually holds with his finger the perpendicular above the scales, and regulates, but never violates by compulsion man's free decision. Man's free will is from this, that he feels life in himself as his, and God leaves him so to feel, that reciprocal conjunction may take place between him and man. And what I received from this is that this may suggest that humankind is that instrument of life, and that nature is life. That nature pours life into us and allows humankind to feel the life, the creativity of nature within, that we may live according to the principles of nature, of which there are many. Yet nature continues to regulate humankind, never violating our free will, because free will is the life we feel within, and the divine feels this, and that we may feel the divine within. It's still of an esoteric flavor, but maybe not so far out of reach as may be what he wrote. Because Emanuel Swedenborg came from a time where the church and God was very strong. In fact, his father became a bishop, and if I recall correctly, a brother-in-law also became a bishop. He was immersed in religion, and in his later life, this is what I found that was fascinating about Emanuel Swedenborg. In his later life, he began to bring together science and religion, much the same as we present even today.
I was just going to say that's as relevant as anything that I've encountered, and beautifully said, beautifully put. God is is life. God alone is life. Kind of encapsulates it all. It very succinctly describes the position of man in his as a sentient being, his self-awareness, his awareness of life, and uh, the freedom to choose. That the idea of free will, man alone having free will. I mean, he just covered all of that. That's very, very powerful and about as succinct of an explanation as I've heard anywhere. So I'm somewhat familiar with Swedenborg, but not those quotations. Thank you for presenting that today.
Yes, you're welcome. If anyone is interested, I can give you a link to where you can find a lot of his writings. They're out of print. You would have to copy and paste if you want to add them to your library. But some of the information at this site, including his, has profound meaning. Thank you again. I felt this was appropriate for this day. Happy Easter, everyone. That's the nice thing about spring. I don't know if you've noticed, but the grass has become a bit greener, a bit taller. That means that lawnmower season is about to start, if it hasn't already. The spring equinox is a time for planting. And before we plant our seeds, we have to take a moment to contemplate what it is that we want to plant. With the winter solstice, it brought the harvest to a close. We took that moment, we put away our accomplishments from the previous season, and we took a moment to sift through the seeds of that season to determine what it is that we wanted to plant. Because we have to prepare the seeds for planting. And when we look at the iconography of the season, we may not see what others see. Traditionally, last Friday, Jesus was put to death. It's the Good Friday. It was the culmination of his season, of the time he spent on this plain. And if we consider, as we contemplated when we talked about Flavius describing another Jesus, a Jesus who led a squad of brigands, who was part of a rebellion. We entertained that this Jesus could have been the same person, that perhaps at some time he stopped or was moved to reflect upon what he had been doing and decided to do something different. As we know, the whole idea of hearing voices in our heads or being moved in a bizarre direction is not unusual, particularly for us who are involved in spiritualism or who openly investigate spirituality. So if we look at this idea of Jesus being a captain during a rebellion, we may find that last Friday may have been an appropriate time for his harvest. That it may have begun The harvesting may have begun when he entered the city victoriously, and then later had gone through that ordeal that he went through. We're not going to go into that because that's something personal. But we can say that his season was cut short. We can say that during that time that is recorded, those 3 years, I believe, during that time, he scattered many seeds. Flavius tells us that he had over 70 disciples, but he chose 12 for his inner circle. From that Friday to this Sunday, many of them went through those seeds that were left, finding those seeds that were potential, that had potential growth to them. And we find many of these seeds did have potential. Look at the variety of practices that are flourishing or that are even being resurrected. The Gnostics, one of my favorite groups that I like to read about and talk about and teach about. Everybody experienced his teachings differently. Even Paul experienced those teachings, even if he may have been in the background, because we know that Paul, before he changed his name, we know he went around looking for those followers of his to persecute them, and yet a seed fell into his hand. A seed fell into many hands. We have many expressions of that. Unfortunately, they couldn't get along, but what family of siblings does get along? But very few of us present are an only child. I had 2 brothers. Oh boy, did we fight. I was either covering for one or getting blamed for another, taking care of one, getting the other one out of my way. Siblings just do not get along, at least until they get much older and much wiser. And we see that in a lot of these different expressions of those seeds that Jesus left us. And even now, at this moment, we are sifting through those seeds that we have found, reviewing his teachings, listening to others, the different interpretations. We've got all these different seeds that we will plant as well. And it is today that after Jesus sifted through those seeds that he had, that he chose to plant a new seed among us. And many of us call this seed the resurrection, but it was more than that. Easter Sunday is a day of birth. It's a day of creation. It's a day of renewal, especially if we look at nature and we take our cues from nature, as many of us do. In a lot of the metaphysical writings, we come across references to the cosmic egg or to the mundane egg, and it is from this egg that the universe was born. Or perhaps it is this egg that describes the universe, full of life, full of renewal. from this egg was the birth of the universe, was the birth of the divine, the birth of life, and from this egg, life is renewed. Now, Jesus was not resurrected on Sunday. Contrary to what everybody teaches, Jesus was not resurrected, because in order to be resurrected, you have to be dead. And Jesus did not die. Not if we subscribe to this idea of the continuity of life. There was a blip, essentially, from Friday to today. And what happened today was a renewal. Because when we look at his teachings, the only dead that existed were those who were ignorant. And, I have to say, I don't believe Jesus was ignorant. He may have began like that if he was that captain, but eventually he became alive. And once you become alive, especially according to the Gnostic teachings, once you become alive, you are no longer dead. So he was renewed. He was the demonstration, just as many teach. He demonstrated that, yes, we don't die. We can't be resurrected unless we die. And the only ones that die are the ones who are ignorant, because they don't know they're alive yet. But he showed us that we become renewed. And that's what this is about. If we continue with this thought of the continuity of life, then those people that we asked for strength and nurturing as they journeyed to the summer land, well, if you're dead, you can't go anywhere. These people are not dead. The Egyptians had a saying, "You depart alive." Nobody dies. Energy does not die. You can't destroy it. You can't create it either. It simply is. It moves from one form to the other, just like fire. Wood moves into flame and heat and smoke, and then as it moves through that, it becomes charred embers, charred wood. It's still wood. It has merely been moved from one form to another. So when we depart, we become renewed. We become reinvigorated. And this is what was demonstrated. We become reinvigorated. And when we continue to read, we move into the last part of the Gospels. And what does he do? He comes back. Jesus is still teaching. He's still giving this message. He's still planting these seeds. And he continues to plant these seeds. He told the disciples, the 12, the inner circle, he told them to wait. And at the end of Passover, I believe it was, at the end of that, as they were all gathered in this room, not just the disciples, many of the followers, not just men, but women, many of them were all there, and they came together as of one mind. One could say they were in a seance. And what is it that we do in a seance? We communicate with those souls. And that's what happened. They communicated with these souls, these licks of flame. Well, we can also interpret that as the crown chakra opening up, their connection with the divine being established. And it is a wonderful experience. You find yourself jubilant. You find yourself, well, you may find yourself jubilant, but the others may find yourself a little tipsy. I think that's what they said. These people are tipsy. Until somebody said they haven't had any wine today. There were other things that happened, but we're not going to go into that. Because today is a time to renew, a time to sift through those seeds that you looked through at the winter solstice. Do you remember those notes that you made when you came out of your meditation? Do you still have those? Do you remember those? Did you plant that seed? Because this is the time to plant it. You've been preparing that seed for all this time, and now is the time to plant it. So we take those seeds from yesterday's life and we sift through them. And we select those seeds that will produce fruit. And we plant them and we nurture them. And some of those seedlings that come up, they don't always do so well. Do we pull them out like weeds and throw them on the heap? No, no, no. If there's any potential there, we just lift them up and plant them in different soil. Use different fertilizer. We nurture them. And even if they don't produce what we want, we allow them to go back into the soil. Remember that seed that you collected from your winter solstice experience. Remember those seeds there. Focus on them. See which ones, no, not see, discover which ones are going to germinate for you. And if you are still nurturing seeds from the previous harvest, from the previous year, because fruit trees don't produce right away. They have to grow for several years before they produce. Just like some of these seeds that you are going to plant or have planted take time to produce. You have to nurture them. This is your opportunity to commune with the divine, to allow the divine to move through you and into you. And the best way to get there is to think about when you were nurtured and when you nurtured others, because this is the expression of love. And it is love that moves us from one area to another.
Oh, your Easter presentation. I well, I enjoyed that as well. Some interesting uh, directions for approaching what is really a very complex idea, and you touched on some facets of that I haven't recently considered, and again, I thank you for sharing that. It's always good for me to expand my perspective and especially to hear it expressed in a slightly different, if not a new way. And you did that. You did that today. And the resurrection of Jesus is a powerful, powerful moment in time. And there are many ways to approach that. And one of the ways that not to approach it, from my perspective, is to oversimplify it because it is so much greater than the traditional churches present it as. And you effectively presented some of that complexity today. Thank you for that.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Not really. It's like Reverend Thomas said, it's nice to hear a different perspective than what we were raised with, every Easter Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's all.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree with the rest too. It just it is a very different way to look at it. And other than the fact that, you said, well, he's not dead. Well, he's not dead. I mean, I guess physical body is gone, but that he's not gone. So you're right. Just like all of us move, when we pass, we move on. So, but it was interesting. And I wasn't here last week, so I didn't hear Sandy told me a little bit about what you talked about last week, but that whole part of his life that is missing from the Bible and things like that those years, the years he was not, that are not recorded there. I mean, we have the book of Levi, or the book of by Levi, the Aquarian Gospel, which does cover some of his life in those years of learning and teaching and going. But I'm sure they're not. I don't know how much not warrior, but I don't know how much of like captain, or like you said, or the rebellion or whatever is that in that book. But I'm sure at the time, the direction he was going in was probably pretty out there. It wasn't I'm sure he could get in a lot of trouble, and he probably did, kind of pushing the envelope, scaring the higher ups. They don't want to be dethroned by some upstart, somebody that's going to rally the people in their corner and not them, somebody new. So yeah, I don't know, what does it all mean? It's a story that like you said, I think has been pretty oversimplified over the years, the way it's taught, the way we always learned of it. Anyway, it was an interesting new way of looking at it, for real. And thanks for sharing that. So.
I know from what we had in the lesson last week, and it just kind of flowed into this week. I thought that was a good continuity of that. You were talking about Jesus's life before he was 30, and the things that he did, and it brought to mind something that a friend of mine mentioned, who's Jewish, and every now and then she likes to tell me things. And one time she was telling me about her perception, or their perception, of Jesus from the Jewish side of things, and that he was a very low individual. He was a rabble rouser. He was a lot of negatives that she was telling me about him, and that's, I guess, their perspective on him, and that he would never have been chosen to be the Christ because he was too low. He was too base and low of an individual, and I think that the what she was trying to say was that he would have come in some kind of glory, and it would be obvious. It wouldn't be a humble man. It would be someone who came in a very overt, way that they would look at it, appearance wise, that they would look at him and know that he was what they were looking for, or this Messiah. He was. So it's just a kind of an interesting thing when you were talking about, his rebellion that he may have had through those years. Well, sure, he was bringing something in that was completely different than what anybody else was saying. So I'm sure there was a lot of fear about him, afraid of him. And it just kind of lent that what my friend told me about their perception of the way he was and what you were saying. And that, but I'm sure it certainly could have been a fight or a trial. That journey would have been a trial to get to where he was, to that point where you said, now he was taking this new path. So anyway, it just was really interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And the references with the potentially earlier life of Jesus, that comes from Flavius Josephus, who was like Paul. He was of Roman and Jewish descent, and that rebellion there was I believe it was termed as the Jewish Wars, because Jesus was not alone in that. There were several others involved in that. And the description that your friend gives sounds like it came straight out of his writings. But as to whether there's an actual connection, I haven't read the book completely. I read enough to introduce a different flavor into the independent spiritualists' mediumship book, to give them a different flavor. And what he actually did right of the Jesus that we are familiar with is that he was considered a wise man and who amazed people with his ability to heal with a thought. I believe it was heal with a thought, or it may have been with a command. But that's what Flavius writes of the Jesus that we are familiar with. So I want to thank all of you for your words and your participation in this. Thank you very much.